Sometimes the most important moments in our lives don't arrive with a loud bang or a dramatic speech. They happen quietly, in a single second, when you see something you can no longer pretend not to see. For me, it was a basket of bread. My son Caleb noticed it before I did, and that is the part that stays with me, playing over and over in my mind like a film I can't switch off. It wasn't the expensive steaks being served around us, or the cutting remark my sister made, or even the argument that followed. It was simply the sight of my 8-year-old boy quietly pulling the bread basket toward himself. He did it so carefully, so gently, as if he already understood that something was wrong, something I had been working very hard not to see myself. At 8 years old, he was already old enough to feel the sting of being left out, but still young enough to try to hide that feeling so I wouldn't feel bad on his behalf. We were gathered that evening at a very expensive restaurant. My sister Melanie had chosen it because she loved how it looked. The lighting was kept deliberately low, and the prices on the menu were high enough that everyone spent the first 20 minutes talking about how much everything cost. Her husband, Greg, had recently started making good money again after a difficult stretch. He works in commercial real estate. And whenever things were going well for him, every family gathering had to become production. There was always imported wine and conversation about how difficult it had been to secure a reservation at such an exclusive place. I arrived late, coming straight from work with Caleb beside me. He was still wearing his blue baseball hoodie underneath the jacket I had made him put on before we left the car. When we walked in, Melanie gave me a quick hug without really looking at me. She was scanning the room the whole time. She said, "You finally made it," and then immediately turned away to speak to someone else. The table was crowded. My mom and dad were there, along with Melanie's family, 2 cousins, and a couple I had never met before. Everyone was already holding colorful drinks and laughing loudly. The menus had been collected almost as soon as we sat down because Melanie had called ahead and ordered for the entire table. She had chosen large steaks, platters of seafood, and several desserts to be shared later. Caleb sat right beside me, well-behaved and quiet, drawing on the back of the paper children's menu with a crayon he found in his jacket pocket. The waiter returned to confirm how everyone wanted their steaks cooked. He went around the table one by one. Then Melanie glanced over at Caleb, as though she had only just noticed he was sitting there. She said in a light, breezy voice, "Oh, we didn't actually order anything for him." I waited for the natural second half of that sentence, the part where she would call the waiter back or ask Caleb what he'd like. That second half never came. Instead, she gave him a small smile and said, "Kids usually just like the bread and the fries anyway, don't they?" Before I could respond, my father laughed from across the table and said, "You should have brought him a snack, Evan. You know how these places are." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody said a word in my son's defense. Caleb gave a tiny shrug. He looked at me with those big eyes of his, clearly trying to signal that I shouldn't worry, and whispered, "It's okay, Dad. I'm not really that hungry anyway." Then he reached into the basket and quietly took a piece of bread. Watching him do that changed something fundamental inside me. It wasn't simply anger, though anger was certainly there. It was a moment of deep and clarifying sadness. I understood in that instant that I was watching my son absorb a lesson I had never intended to teach him. He was learning that some people expect you to sit quietly while they treat you as though you don't quite matter. And the worst part was that this lesson was being delivered by his own family. For a long time, I had allowed Melanie to behave this way without consequence. I stayed quiet when she made comments about my small apartment after my marriage ended. I said nothing when she mocked my old work truck in front of other people. I even let it pass when she introduced me to her friends as the brother who was still trying to get his life together, despite the fact that I work 50 hours a week and run my own business. I always told myself I was keeping the peace, doing what was best for the family. But Caleb was watching me now, and I understood for the first time that children learn their own worth by paying close attention to the moments that adults assume are too small to matter. When the waiter returned with another bottle of wine, I stood up. I didn't raise my voice or cause commotion, but I stood up straight and tall enough that conversation stopped and people looked over. I said calmly and clearly, "I'd like Caleb's and my portion of the bill kept separate from everyone else's, please." The waiter nodded. Then I looked at my sister and said, I also need to let you know that I'll be canceling my share of the deposit for the summer lake house before the deadline tomorrow." The table went completely silent. Melanie blinked at me and asked, "What?" I turned back to the waiter first and apologized for the timing. Then I looked at her again and explained that I meant the vacation rental deposit, the large payment I had made the previous month, so the family wouldn't lose the booking. It was immediately apparent that most of the people at the table had no idea what I was referring to. Melanie had never told them. Her expression shifted, and she hissed at me quietly, "Evan, don't do this here. You're making a scene." But I wasn't making a scene. I was simply stopping a lie from continuing. Greg leaned forward and asked, "Wait, you paid a deposit?" I told him I had covered a significant portion of it. My father looked genuinely confused and said he had assumed Greg had handled everything. Greg said nothing at all. He just looked down at his water glass. A few months earlier, Melanie had called me privately to say they were short on money because Greg's work had slowed down. She asked me to help secure the vacation house so the family wouldn't lose the booking, and she promised to pay me back. I had agreed without hesitation because that is what I believe families did for each other. But sitting there watching my son eat a plain piece of bread while everyone around him cut into expensive steaks, I saw clearly that my generosity had been accepted by people who didn't even think my child deserved a meal at the table. Melanie whispered that I was embarrassing her. I almost wanted to laugh at that. Instead, I looked down at Caleb and asked him, "Hey, buddy, do you want to go get burgers somewhere?" He nodded so quickly and so completely that it was obvious he had been hoping I would say exactly those words all evening. We walked out into the cool night air together, and it felt genuinely good to leave all that noise and pretense behind. As we drove away, Caleb was quiet for a few minutes. Then he looked over at me and asked, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" That question cut right through me. I told him firmly that he had done absolutely nothing wrong. He thought about it and then asked, "Then why didn't they order food for me?" It is the kind of question that adults spend enormous energy trying to avoid, but children see through to the plain truth of things without any effort at all. I took a breath and told him that sometimes people get so used to thinking certain people matter more than others that they stop noticing how wrong that is, and that they are wrong. A week later, the summer vacation was quietly canceled. It became too expensive all of a sudden. My father called me a few times, clearly hoping to smooth things over, but he never once addressed what had actually happened at the restaurant. Melanie sent me several long text messages full of explanations and justifications, saying she had been stressed and that I was being too sensitive about everything. But in none of those messages did she mention Caleb. She never apologized to him. That told me more than anything else she could have said or written. A month later, there was another family dinner, this time for a cousin's birthday. I asked Caleb if he wanted to go. He thought about it carefully for a moment and then asked, "Can we just do something by ourselves instead?" He wasn't angry. He was just being careful now, in the way that children become careful after they've been hurt somewhere they expected to feel safe. I told him of course we could. So that Saturday, after his baseball game, I took him to a small old-fashioned diner not far from the field. It was the opposite of that restaurant in every possible way. The menus were slightly sticky and the booth seats had seen better days, but the woman who served us was genuinely warm to everyone who walked through the door. Caleb ordered exactly what he wanted without a moment's hesitation: a cheeseburger, extra fries, and a large chocolate milkshake. He didn't glance at the prices. While he ate, he talked and laughed about his baseball cards and told me stories about his friends at school. I sat across from him just listening, and somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary happiness, I understood something I should have understood much sooner. Peace is not the same thing as silence. For years I had confused the two, believing that keeping quiet and staying at the table no matter what was a responsible and loving thing to do. But real peace is not found by enduring a place where you and your child are treated as less than everyone else. Real peace sometimes requires the courage to stand up, to say clearly what is true, and to walk out into the cool night air with your son beside you. The burger we ate that evening in that small, unstylish diner was one of the best meals of my life. Not because of the food, but because of who was sitting across from me, and the fact that he could order anything he wanted without anyone in that room making him feel like he didn't belong there